All right. Hello, everybody. I think we are live. I just have to wait for YouTube to catch up and it takes them a second to actually start showing it. Oh, and we're having connectivity. Okay. Hopefully that was it. Hopefully it was just they were not wanting to connect for a second. And so, anyway, so we're going to get started on a topic that has been much requested by, people, you know, I talk about this with people online. I talk about this with people in person because people know that I am a middle school teacher. I have a lot of times parents that I know with young children who are thinking about, okay, what do we do for education? Are we sending our kids to public school, private school? Are we homeschooling? And they'll come, kind of pick my brain on what is the reality in the public schools. And I also hear from a lot of people, especially conservative Christians, pro-life people, just, people who are concerned about the direction our society is going. And, seeing, seeing the concern with parents that are looking at our world today. You hear stuff in the news, see all the stuff about transgender children and this push to allow children to change their gender without their parents' input, or their parents, if you say no, your child shouldn't try to change their gender, then your children could be taken away from you, and those sorts of concerning things that may be coming in the future. And so and not to mention our, the sexuality in our culture, the prevalence of pornography, all these things that parents are like, well, how do I protect my child from the world? And I wanted to address this with what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing in the public schools, but also just in the culture in general, because I want parents who are thinking this way to shift their thinking from protect to prepare. Okay. So my biggest thing on this topic is going to be that you cannot shield your child from every terrible, awful thing in the world, because eventually your child is going to be an adult. And this society would like to make your child an adult sooner rather than later, before they're 18. They would like to make them an adult when they're 12 or 13 or even younger in some cases. And there's definitely been a push in society, is this the whole slippery slope argument, 20 years ago, people said, oh, if we accept the LGBTQ messaging here, the next thing they're going to push for is pedophilia. And we're starting to see at least the beginnings of that now. And we're starting to see people who identify as minor attracted persons, or MAPS, asking for the same level of tolerance and acceptance that our society has given to people who are gay or lesbian or transgender or whatever else. And so I see a lot of parents really concerned about this sort of thing. And because the society is going to work so hard to make your children into adults before they actually are, it's important to prepare them, because you cannot shield them from everything. You can go live on a homestead out in the middle of nowhere and homeschool your children, and you still cannot shield them from everything. Unless you literally never let them come into contact with society at all, which, again, is not going to prepare them for adulthood. It's very important that we start preparing our children for the day that they do have to go out into society and navigate, and do so in a way that is consistent with the values that you want them to have. So I want us to shift away from protecting children and into preparing them. Now, obviously, very, very young children, you can shield them from a lot of the stuff. And that's a big part of that, is just watching their media and watching not, and I know if you're a busy parent, especially if you're a single parent, it's very difficult to not, put your kid in front of the TV and walk away because you need to make dinner or you need to do whatever else. But as much as possible, make sure that you're watching shows with your kids, especially if you're using YouTube. I really recommend against YouTube for small children, especially putting on an autoplay, even if it's YouTube Kids. The algorithms are not perfect. And in fact, there's been some very concerning things with that. But generally speaking, with young children, you can monitor their media, you can choose what they watch, and that gives you a lot of control in the early years. The trick comes when they start to get older, and by older, we're talking like 9 or 10. Okay, once they are interacting with peers their own age, really is where you start to lose some control. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't let them interact with peers their own age, or that you have to supervise them every time that they're with peers their own age. At some level, you do have to give your kids some autonomy and some ability to interact with their peers without your direct supervision all the time. That is just part of growing up and part of learning and ability to be independent that they will need as adults. But you have to take some steps before they get to that point, because when they're really young, when they're 4 or 5, and they're interacting with peers their own age, you're supervising. You're not leaving them alone, because they could get into whatever. But it's when you start leaving them alone with peers that they have the ability to be exposed to things that you have so far tried to shield them from. And if you haven't prepared them for this, if you haven't prepared them for being exposed to some of these things, you're going to have a problem, because you're going to be surprised by it too. You're not going to expect one of their friends to talk to them about sexuality at age 9, or to show them porn at age 11. You're not thinking about that. Most likely, that's not something you're expecting from your kid's little friend who likes to come over. And your kid's little friend isn't necessarily doing this maliciously, doesn't know what they're showing, doesn't know what they're talking about, but they're going to expose your kid to things that you weren't expecting them to be exposed to yet. So instead of saying, oh, I'm never going to let my kid play with any other kids, I'm never going to let them be alone with any other kids, I'm going to super screen and vet everybody my kid comes in contact with, none of those things are realistic. So what you can do is you can make some choices, and you can decide to, instead of waiting for the world to expose your kid to all of this nonsense, you can choose to, in a controlled and careful way, prepare them for these things. Part of that is making sure that they know the values that you and your family have and why you have those values. It's so important for them to know, why do you have those values? It's one thing to say, oh, we, think sex before marriage is wrong, or we think that God created us male and female. It's another thing to explain, why those values are so important, and help them have an answer ready for when they do run into somebody who disagrees with them. Because if they've never been given kind of an answer, if they've never been told, why you believe these things, then the first time they come into contact with somebody who believes differently, they're not going to know what to say, and they're going to begin to doubt. So there's a few resources that I do want to share with you guys. And this is whether you yourself are a parent, or whether you're a teacher with young students and you're concerned about some of these things, especially if you're a teacher who's in either a private school or kind of homeschool, micro school scenario where you have some flexibility with being able to, or where the parents are expecting you to teach Christian values. If you're in that kind of situation, I do want to share this. But first thing I want to say is the best thing you can do, honestly, and I'm recommending this to anybody I know with kids, if you at all are in any way able to homeschool your children, do so. You need to know what your children are being taught, and the best way to do that is to teach them to them yourself. So, there's this whole, idea of like, oh, well, I'm not a teacher, I wouldn't know where to begin. There are a lot of good curriculums out there, and the nice thing about looking up a homeschool curriculum and using it is that you can preview it, and you can say, yes, I want to teach them this. No, I don't want to teach them that. And finding a good starting point is important. And I'm going to kind of show you there. So this is, let's go back to their homepage. I was kind of going around on their website, but this is Memoria Press. And so this is a classical education curriculum for homeschool families. And it's the idea of, the great books, the literature, them kind of learning, what we would consider as a classical education. They learn Latin as they get older, classical history and literature. It's a Christian worldview. So if you're like, man, Western civilization is crashing and burning, this is intended to kind of continue, to teach children the value of Western civilization and our values. So this is something to look into. Now, of course, it does cost money, right? And so I'm definitely sensitive to families that are where that's not an option, to spend a bunch of money on a big curriculum. And so what I want to say from that, let me just do that. There we go. So I want to say with that is that I'm a middle school teacher, and we have a curriculum in the sense that we have state standards. So it's the Texas Education Knowledge and Skills, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. Duh. And let me actually pull those up for you guys right now. Let me see if I can just pull up the whole thing. It's elementary. So yeah, let me just pull up like math. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So here's the math ones. And so this is, the middle school math TEKS, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And so you go down here and these are the things that they need to know, in middle school. And this is grade 6. So it's like, student uses mathematical processes to acquire and demonstrate mathematical understanding. So these are pretty basic level things. Student applies mathematical process standards to use rational numbers. So it's got some kind of legalese language because this is law in that sense, that this is what public schools are expected to teach. But you can go through the state standards in your state just to get a sense of what is your child expected to learn at each grade level from a public school standpoint. Now, the benefit of homeschool is that you don't have to stick to this, right? If your kid is advanced beyond this, great. If they can go beyond this, if they can exceed this, that's awesome. But if your kid is struggling, you can slow down. You don't have to keep them on grade level for every aspect. And the nice thing about homeschool is you can have them go ahead in one area and give them more time in another area, right? And you can target the things that they need to learn and that they're struggling with. But so what I would say is, if you're in the situation where you want to homeschool your child, but you can't afford an expensive curriculum, start with your state standards, but then make sure you read them. Don't just use them blindly, because you may find things that you're like, I don't know about that, So take your state standards as a general framework of here's what your child is expected to learn in each grade level. Use it, change it, don't just follow it blindly, but use it as a starting point to say, okay, my kid's supposed to do, equations like y equals whatever in this year, and work on those, right? But again, feel free to go past them. Feel free to slow down if you need to. And of course, this is math, so you're not necessarily, and this is Texas, so it's like we're not putting social justice stuff in math yet. But if you find that kind of stuff in the state standards, of course you can say, nah, I'm not going to do that. So for Texas, we have TEA has this whole thing where here's all the standards for different grade levels, and here's all the different, subject matters. But, I'm saying use this as a starting point to say, you know what, this is, this is what I'm expecting my kid to know. That doesn't mean that they're going to get everything all at once and all of that. But, and again, checking those standards to make sure that they are in line with what you're trying to teach your kid. And so that's a great place to start, because the thing is, as a teacher, as a public school teacher, I'm not following any like pre-prepared lesson plans, right? And every once in a while I'll be given pre-prepared lesson plans, and I usually at least heavily tweak them, if not completely rewrite them, because I have my own style. I have my own style of teaching, and I have my I know how my students learn, and I know what they need. And so same thing for you if you're homeschooling your kid, is you can buy an expensive fancy curriculum, but you may find yourself tweaking and adjusting everything in that curriculum pretty frequently. So what I would say is, when you're kind of planning your lessons for your homeschool, again, you can use Memoria Press or another homeschool curriculum, especially if you don't have a lot of time, you don't have the time to plan lessons. But what I would say is, start trying to plan some of your own, and you're going to find you have a lot of freedom, and there's a lot of free resources out there. So if you don't want to buy an expensive curriculum, there's so many free resources out there that you can use to create your own lessons. And there's so many resources out there that are specific to subject matter and grade level. So if anybody has like a specific situation, like, oh, my kid is in, my kid's in fifth grade, or they're at approximately fifth grade level or whatever, and I'm struggling to teach them math, I could kind of help you, point you in the direction of some resources. But, I don't want, like, there's so many different resources, and it really so much depends on what you're looking for. So if you have specific questions, feel free to comment on this video. I'll try to check the comments. And if you have specific case by case scenarios where you're like, hey, I need help with this or that, I can try and give you some of the resources that I know of for those grade levels and subject matters. But the idea is that you can, even if you're not a professional teacher and you don't have years of teaching experience, you can teach your children, and you can find the resources that you need. Because here's the thing, guess what? I don't know everything. And there's a lot of times where I'm going to teach a lesson and I have to teach it to myself first. So don't think that just because you struggled with math in high school, or you whatever, don't think that means that you can't teach your children, or that you need to go get a teaching degree first. I never got a teaching degree. I got a psychology degree. I did a teaching certification program online, but it wasn't, there's nothing magical that happens when you go through that teaching certification program where suddenly you know everything, right? You get, there's some stuff that you learn about lesson development and what makes an engaging lesson, and, how to, Bloom's taxonomy and things like that. But there's nothing that you learn in a teaching certification program, or even in a teaching degree, because I've got lots of colleagues who have teaching degrees. There's nothing that you learn that you couldn't learn on your own if you're just trying to teach your kids. So most of the time I'm teaching myself before I teach my students, because, I don't have everything memorized. I don't have this like encyclopedia in my brain. I have to go look things up too. So I do encourage homeschooling. Again, if you have specific case-by-case questions or things like that about, like, well, how would I teach this, or how do I teach that, or what resources are there for this, do let me know in the comments, and I will look some of those up and get those to you, things that I've used before, because I used to teach elementary. I used to, now I teach middle school. So I've got kind of some different resources I can pull from. Another great resource, and let me just pull this up real fast. It just occurred to me to share this with you guys. So this is Teachers Pay Teachers. And so this is what a lot of teachers use, especially elementary school teachers. So if you have young children, this is really, really good. You can register. You don't have to be a teacher to use this. You can register, and you can go through, and real quick, you can click this free button down here, free resources. There's also stuff you can buy that's pretty cheap. So these are lessons and resources uploaded by teachers all over the country. And you can go by grade level, and you can go by, and there's homeschool specific resources. So like this is, all sorts of things, right? So just all sorts of things that you can do, that you can get for your teachers, or sorry, for your kids, for teaching your kids. And it's a really great resource. I don't use it as much anymore as I used to. I used it a lot when I was first getting into teaching, because it was like, where do I start? And so, it's like Punnett squares in biology and stuff like that. So whatever it is that you're struggling with, that you need help with, activities that you need, they are here. You make an account, and then if you create your own stuff, you can upload it. And you always upload at least one free thing, and then you can upload things that cost money. And if you have good resources, people can pay for them from you. So that's a whole thing. But anyway, so I just wanted to show you guys that as well. This is teacherspayteachers.com. Pretty simple. And but I say all this to say that you can take control of your child's education and homeschool. You can do it. It is doable. It may seem overwhelming at first, but honestly, and a lot of parents right now are saying, who have their kids in public school and stuff like that, are saying, well, I feel like I'm already teaching. So, if it's just the next step of actually withdrawing them from the public school and actually, starting a homeschool program, I mean, go for it, So, if we're talking about protecting your children and preparing them, right? So like I said at the beginning, we want to protect our children from the things in the world, but we also want to prepare them for when they do have to go out into that world themselves. And when they have peers, and, especially, in the teenage years, when they have peers who are influencing them, right? Having them be prepared for that. And a big thing that, you're going to run into raising kids is the sexuality issue, and them understanding their value and dignity as a person, so that it is harder for somebody else to abuse or exploit them, right? Because there are a lot of, like, the internet, the society wants to abuse and exploit your children. I'm going to say it like that, because it's the reality. The media wants to abuse and exploit your children. There's just, I think it was Fight the New Drug had some study recently that they posted, where it was, children as young as 9, were using pornography, and the children around the ages like 9 to 11 or something like that were making up a significant portion of people under 18, people under 18 using pornography. And we know what pornography does to the brain. We know that it's addictive, just like a drug, that it changes how the brain is structured. It changes the way that people think. It really, really is an awful influence on young children, boys and girls. Please hear me when I say this. Boys and girls can become addicted to pornography. Please do not think that because you have a little girl that she is safe and innocent and therefore will never, ever go to this. That children are being groomed by society to think that pornography is okay, to think that it's funny or cool, or it's an adult thing that you do. I mean, even our kind of our euphemism for pornography is adult content, right? We say adult content. What message are we sending to children when we say that this is adult content? We're telling them that this is something that they should aspire to, that they should want to watch if they see themselves as grown up. And kids tend to do this. Kids tend to think, well, I'm grown up. I'm more mature than my peers. I'm mature enough to handle whatever. Like, they always think that because they're as mature as they've ever been, right? And when we frame things as adult content, or this is what adults do, we're setting them up to be pulled into all of this. So part of it is teaching them their own dignity and teaching them the dignity of others and the value of others, to prevent them from seeing, so that when they do come across pornography, because they will, and this is my point, you're not going to stop them from ever coming across pornography. That's not going to happen. But what you can do is prepare them to value themselves and value others, so that when they do come across it, it'll gross them out. It'll disturb them, right? Rather than intrigue them or pique their curiosity. Because if you have a kid who comes across pornography and they understand their dignity and value and the dignity and value of others, and they come across pornography, they're going to say, this is horrible. What are they doing to that poor, like they're going to have a visceral reaction against it if they have a value of themselves and value of their own identity and everything. So a resource I want to offer to you guys, I have a copy of this, but I lent it out. So I'm always lending out this book to people. So my copy is currently lent out. So here's just the Amazon page for it, but it's The Failure of Sex Education in the Church by Linda Bartlett. And it says Mistaken Identity, Compromised Purity. And it's a really great book. The majority of the book is explaining how, the church has tried to follow the world in sex education, or tried to match the world, or kind of like, oh, we're going to take the sex education that the world is using and we're going to put our own Christian spin on it. And it's always failed. It's always failed. And so she goes through a lot of how we got to where we are with the sexual revolution and all of this. And then but the biggest thing is at the back of the book is there's an appendix at the back. And this is why I lend this to people. The front matter, like the majority of the book is great. And it's a great education if you don't already understand how we got to where we are and why things are so messed up. But what I really emphasize in this is the back of the book, because she has this table that goes by age from small children all the way up to, teenage years. And then it's, at a certain point it's, regardless of gender, then at a certain point it splits to boys versus girls. But it's, how do you teach your child? What do you teach them at what age? And this is when I tell parents about this, they're like, oh my gosh, I need this book. And so I keep lending this book out to people because it really is what I think a lot of parents are looking for, is how do I teach my children the values that I want them to have? When do I start? And I want everybody to get away from the idea of the talk. We hear about the talk. When do you have the talk with your kids? And it's this idea that you're going to sit down your kids one day and you're going to tell them about sex and pornography, and you're going to tell them about everything that they, need to know all in one sitting. And that's a bad idea. That's a terrible idea. Do not sit down your kids one day and have the talk. Okay? You should be putting in, as you go, bits and pieces of the talk that are age appropriate, so that by the time they are ready for the talk, they already have a foundation. Because if you go from the standpoint of having the talk, you would really have to have the talk at age 8. If you wanted to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and lay out all of the things that the world is going to teach you all in one sitting, you'd have to do that at age 8, because past age 8, they're going to get it from the world if they haven't already. When I taught first grade, I had a student who began singing a song about, and the lyrics went something like, you better come and get her because she's dancing like a stripper. All right. And I don't know if that kid knew what a stripper was, but he's clearly hearing it in the music. And it's like, you think, oh, little kids, they don't understand what the music is saying. They do. Right? This little boy was hearing the words in the songs. He understood them at least enough to know what they were and to be able to repeat them. And so he's singing that in class in first grade. Old boy's 7 years old. So when you think that your child is sheltered and protected because of their age, think again. So in order to prepare your children, you need to be establishing a foundation of values and a foundation of an understanding of their identity, especially their identity in Christ. I'm talking specifically to Christian families here, who are mostly the ones who I think are concerned about this, but their identity in Christ and that their identity is not in their gender or their sexuality or any of this other stuff. Their identity is in Christ and who God made them to be. That God created them. God made you special and he loves you very much, to quote VeggieTales. But to give them that sense, to give them that very real sense of their dignity and worth and value as a child of God, so that when the society tries to chip away at that value, they're going to have that defense, right? And that's what's going to protect them. You can't shield them from every piece of media, but you can establish a foundation. So I highly recommend this book. It comes in a Kindle version for $9, or you can get the paperback if you prefer paperback. And there's used copies if you want to. I also recommend this as a gift to, consider this as a baby shower gift, honestly. I know it seems kind of weird, but if you have friends and family members who are like-minded and who are concerned about these things and want, you got a friend who's having a baby and, you've had this conversation where it's like, yeah, I don't know, how do you raise a child in this world, right? In this society? Get them this gift as a baby shower gift, because it really is something that you want to start as early as possible as far as the lessons that they have in the back. And I wonder if they have the back cover. I was wondering if they have so here's the table of contents. And it, it has kind of what the concept of the world views, versus the world versus the church. Why should Christians be concerned about it? Talking about where our sexual education came from with Kinsey and all of that. And, all of this kind of stuff about the society wanting to sexualize children. And, kind of goes through all of this stuff, and our identity and how, and, again, mature manhood and womanhood is not sensually driven. So teaching your children to grow up to be men and women, not just sexual beings, right? God's design for love, sex, and marriage, and all of this stuff, and talks about all of these issues. There's so much in here. And then, it doesn't even go through the whole table of contents in the preview, but, so just, it's such a good book. It is so worth buying. It's worth buying as a gift. You're going to get so much value out of this if you use it, that's going to be way worth $17 or $9 or whatever you spend on it. So I wanted to offer this as a resource because this is the biggest concern I think that I have looking at, kids today. And I teach in a middle school, a public middle school. And it's interesting because I'm in Texas, which is fairly conservative, but I'm in the Austin area, which is fairly liberal. But the district I'm in is also more conservative. So I'm kind of in the middle. So I kind of see my district and my campus as something that's in the middle, in between the extremes. You have more conservative areas and more liberal areas. We're kind of in the middle. So in the middle, what I'm seeing is, we still have abstinence-only education for sex ed, but it's such an outdated and terribly written curriculum that the kids just laugh at it. And we're required to just read it verbatim. When I had to teach it one year when I taught science, and I couldn't really ad lib, I couldn't sit there and tell them what I really thought. I had to read from the curriculum. And I could tell that the PowerPoints, it was awful. It was awful. And it still is. I just don't have to teach it anymore. But it's an abstinence-only curriculum, which you're like, yes, that's good. But when it doesn't prepare kids for what they're encountering, even at that point, I'm teaching it to 7th graders, and it's like some of them have already had sex. Yeah. Right. Okay. So that's the thing. Yes, some of them have already had sex. When I was in 7th grade, one of my classmates got pregnant. She ended up leaving the school. They told us she went to some boarding school or something. I don't know. But again, it happens, right? And if you're waiting until 6th or 7th grade to teach your children abstinence only, and some of them are already not abstinent, what are you doing? What are you saying to those kids? What are you telling those kids? Are they going to learn that it's too late? That, oh, well, I already did it? Are they going to learn that it's only about risks? Like, because we like to do the risk avoidance kind of thing where it's like, oh, well, you could get STDs and you could get pregnant and you could get this and that and the other. Kids think that they're invincible. They don't think about themselves as having those risks happen to them. What are you teaching them? Are you teaching them about their dignity and identity and value? You know, and the program that we use is called Worth the Wait. And we use the program and it says worth the wait, but there's nothing in the program that really teaches children why they are worth the wait. It just tells them that they are. So that's why it's so important to be teaching your kids, not just that they should be abstinent, but also why. Why are they worth the wait? Why do they have dignity and value? Where does that dignity and value come from? If their friends reject them, if their peers reject them because they're not doing the stuff that their peers expect them to do, where is their dignity? Where is their value when they're rejected by society because they're different? You have to prepare them for that. You know, not just, oh, you're going to encounter all this stuff. You have to prepare them for rejection. Because if they don't go along with the narrative, they don't go along with what's expected of them, they will be rejected by peers, by society. And so I think this book does an excellent job of explaining that and explaining how to prepare them. So I can't recommend this book enough. And you know, it's just so important, especially with the pornography issue. And I'm going to say this a million times, but do not assume that your child is not watching pornography. If your child has access to the internet in any way, shape, or form, on a computer, on a phone, on a tablet, assume that they have access to pornography. And that if they haven't started watching it yet, they will come across it. And the goal is to prepare them, so that if they come across it, when they come across it, they will have a reaction against it where they'll say, ew, I don't want to see this. This is disturbing. This is gross. I don't like this. And they will turn it off. That's what you have to prepare them for. Because the curriculum that my school district uses, it talks about pornography as something that somebody might try to force on them. Somebody might try to show them this and they, you know, and essentially saying, oh, well, if you don't want to see it, you don't have to. But it doesn't prepare kids for what if you want to see it? What if you see it and you think you like it? You know, so talking to children about, first of all, their dignity and their value, but as they get older, also talking to them about, hey, there are terrible things in the world that can be tempting, that can look like they're attractive. And this is where you go back to the Garden of Eden. You go back to every example in the Bible of somebody being tempted and that this looked good. You know, you talk about, you know, in the Garden of Eden, the apple, you know, the fruit or whatever it is that Eve eats, it's not gross and evil looking, right? It looks like it was good for food and pleasing to the eye. Right. And she takes a bite of it and helping them understand that a lot of times the wrong thing looks good. It looks cool. It looks like fun. And getting them prepared for the fact that they may see things that they know are wrong. But a part of their brain says, maybe this isn't so bad. And understanding that these are things that can hurt them. And again, if you give them that foundation of what their value and dignity is, it's going to be a lot easier for them to resist those things. But it's also important to keep the communication lines open so that as they get older and as they run into these things, even if they start watching some of the stuff without your knowledge, that they feel like they can come and talk to you about it and you can help them get away from it. But again, emphasizing that you will not prevent them from coming across this stuff. You can only prepare them for what happens when they do. And it's children as young as 9 watching pornography. And you can't filter it all. You can filter your internet, you can block certain things, but you will not be able to block everything because it's everywhere. It's not just on Pornhub, right? It's on so many websites. It's on so many social media sites. And you can't just stop your kid from getting social media because, I mean, you can discourage it. You can make them wait till they're a teenager or whatever. But at some point, you have to teach them how to navigate these things. Because if you throw them, if they go out into the world at 18 and they don't know how to navigate this stuff, they're going to just get as lost as they would have. Like, it's not going to work out well for them if they just go out into the world at 18, go to college, and they've never learned how to navigate any of this. So it's so important. It's so important to prepare them early. And so my biggest things would be get your kids out of public school. Public school is not going anywhere good. Like I said, my school district is fairly moderate. We do have an abstinence-only sex education. We also have a Gay Straight Alliance club on campus that is run by the counselors. So, and we used to have a giant pride flag up in the cafeteria. In fact, during Pride Week, we had not only the rainbow pride flag, but we had all the other pride flags for transgender and non-binary and asexual and whatever. We had all the pride flags all over. And we're in a fairly moderate, middle of the road school district. We're not on the crazy liberal edge. So if you're thinking, well, my kid's school's not that bad, it's not going anywhere good. It's not getting better. It's only going to get worse. They're going to push all of this stuff. They're going to push all the social justice stuff. They're going to push all the gender and sexuality stuff. If you should know what the curriculum is they're using, because a lot of districts are using curriculum that is written by Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood's curriculum begins in kindergarten. And that doesn't mean that they're telling them to have sex with each other in kindergarten, but it does mean they're going to start telling them that touching themselves is normal. That's what Planned Parenthood's going to teach them. So it's really important. It's so important that if you can get your kids out of public school, and if you can homeschool, because even private schools, a lot of private schools are accredited by state-sponsored organizations or by the state itself. And if you have an accredited school, they want that accreditation, they're going to compromise values to keep that accreditation. So if the accrediting body, if the organization says you have to teach that LGBTQ, all of that is okay, are they gonna lose their accreditation, or are they gonna say, yeah, it's okay? So just be very, very careful, even with private schools, and make sure that you don't assume that just because your kid's in a private school that therefore everything's fine. Make sure that you do know what they're learning, that you do know what their curriculum says and what their views are and what their values are. But if possible, please, please, please homeschool your children, if at all possible. And make sure that you incorporate some of this stuff, like what's in the book, the failure of sex education in the church. Make sure you incorporate some of that into what you're teaching them. Another cool resource that I want to share with you guys, because I know a lot of you guys, in addition to being worried about the sexuality and gender and even politics and whatever else, is a lot of people are going to be concerned about our abortion-minded culture. So we have this pro-abortion culture, where the default position is being pro-choice, right? If you don't know what's going on, if you're not involved in the issues, you're pro-choice. And it's so easy for kids to grow up thinking, well, that's not my business. We teach kids to mind their own business, right? And how do you teach a child to be pro-life without teaching them, without scarring them with the reality of abortion? And I think I think you can teach your kids about abortion earlier than you think you can, because, and it's hard. It's hard, but if your kids have a concept of what death is and what murder is, if they have those concepts, you can teach them about abortion, because you can, and if you've, especially if they have younger siblings and they remember their younger sibling being in the mother's womb, or if you can show them, or if they know, somebody who's pregnant and who's having a baby, and you can teach them, okay, there's a baby in there, and you can teach them what happens. But if you're not quite at that point yet, you don't want to just straight up teach them what abortion is. This is a really good book. This is a really good book. So this is from Bethany Bomberger. Her husband, Brian Bomberger, and she and her husband run the Radiance Foundation. That is it's a pro-life organization, and they especially emphasize reaching out to the Black community, and they emphasize adoption, because Ryan Bomberger was adopted himself, and they've adopted children and all of this. And so they wrote this book, and it's called Pro-Life Kids. So it's about, valuing life. So it says pro-life means for life. We're cheering for you. Your life is important, and there's only one you. So it's building this foundation of the value. Again, it goes hand in hand with the Failure of Sex Education book. It's building this idea of the value of your life, right? That you are valuable. And that's the pro-life position, right? The pro-life position is that every life matters, every life is valuable, and that our value does not depend on our wantedness, on our acceptance by society, on our ability level, or anything like that. It says, and so this is where you can kind of introduce the idea without necessarily going into the details of what abortion is. But you could, because it says, sadly, there are those who don't understand that life has a purpose, whether planned or unplanned. And so it talks about, and so you see some of these signs. So if you take your kids to the March for Life, they may see some of these signs from counter protesters, right? And so it's common slogans that you would see on pro-choice signs, and to help them understand, like, there are people who don't understand, and it takes away, because you don't want to give your kids this idea like, oh, those are the bad guys, those are the bad people. It's like, these are people who don't understand, and you can give your kid a level of empathy and compassion for somebody who doesn't understand, versus somebody who's evil and trying to hurt babies. Like, you don't want to go to that level, right? You want to say, okay, they don't understand. And it says, it doesn't matter your size, your age, you have equal value, whatever the stage. And so there's, and it's all the idea of, like, from little baby to old people, everybody has value, and it talks about, and this is a good one, because the book connects to the civil rights movement, and your kids, especially if they're in public school, they will be learning about the civil rights movement from a very young age. In elementary school, they'll be talking about the civil rights movement and racism from a very early age. And so if you can connect those early on, connect the pro-life movement and the civil rights movement, if you can connect those things in your child's mind, that's a really great place to start, right? So, and that's the thing, is your kid's going to learn about racism and the civil rights movement, and they're going to learn about racists being bad people. And if you're afraid to tell them about the pro-life movement, and about fighting for the rights of the preborn child, it's like, why are you're more scared? It's like your kid's school is not scared of introducing them to the concept of racism. Teach them what it means to be pro-life. Teach them what it means to value everybody. And so we have those signs. That every life has a purpose. Some of the best things in life are unplanned, sidewalk counselors, so all of that. And those are great. It's a great book. So again, it's a great kids book, and you can use it kind of at various ages. You just have to know the kid that you're buying this for, whether it's your kid or a friend's kid. And that's the thing is, it says here, children are naturally pro-life, which is true. You talk to your child about, the baby in the womb, you show them an ultrasound and like, oh yeah, that's a baby. And of course we should protect that baby. Like, that's kind of an obvious, it's a duh. But society will teach them that the default position is not to protect life, but to protect choice, the choice to preserve that life or end that life. And so I think it's just very, very important that we introduce those concepts early. And this is a great kind of kids book that you can use to do that. So I can't stay on as long as I normally do. This is going to be a shorter one. Actually, I mean, it's not really that short. We're almost at an hour anyway. So really great to share this stuff with you guys. But when I talk about preparing your child for the future and for the society that they're going to live in, not just today's society right now, but where we're headed. And you see where we're headed because it's the acceptance not only of the LGBTQ, the transgenderism, the sexuality, all this stuff, but also now the pushing of child, sexuality in children. And you saw that with the Cuties movie that Netflix put out and promoted and defended. And you see it in all these places where it's this idea that children should be sexual. And it didn't start recently. It starts back in the 70s with Alfred Kinsey, or in the 60s, I think, with Alfred Kinsey, right? It's not recent. It's not a recent idea, but it's something they've been slowly introducing to us over time, such that we get to the point where we don't even realize how far, we're the frog boiling in water. We don't realize how far we've gotten because it's been a little bit at a time. You see it when you go buy clothes for your children at a regular store, and especially for little girls' clothing, and how hard it is to find stuff that's just kids' clothes and not, this kind of stuff that looks like they're a teenager. Your daughter's 5 and you're buying her clothes that make her look like she's 14. And the 14-year-old clothes make her look like she's 21. There's a push to make your child an adult before they actually are. And you have to prepare them. And it's sad because I wish we lived in a society where the kids could just be kids and we wouldn't have to worry about any of this. But we do. We do have to worry about it. We do have to think about it. It is important that you prepare your children and don't just shelter them. Don't just shield them. Prepare them, because they will come across this stuff. They will encounter it. And just cutting off their internet or not letting them have a phone, that's not going to save them. That's not going to protect them. It might for a little bit. It might delay things for a little bit. But at some level, they have to be prepared so that when they do, because they will come across this stuff, when they do, they need to be prepared to deal with it and to have an answer for it and to be able to reject what they know is wrong. So that's really important. It's also important to have your kids in church and to be teaching them why you believe what you believe. Learn some Christian apologetics if you haven't already. If you've just been going along like, well, I believe this because I believe it. Make sure you know your faith. Whether that means, in the Lutheran church and in the Catholic churches, there's catechism. We have catechisms like the book. And we also have like catechism classes, that you take before becoming a member usually or being confirmed. Consider taking, even if you took one of those classes as a kid, take it again. Take an adult confirmation or adult catechism class just to learn, right? Just to relearn some of the things you've already learned. Read your catechism. If you're not Lutheran, if you don't have a catechism, if your church doesn't have a catechism, go to your pastor and talk to your pastor about like, what are some books I should be reading to better learn my faith? What should I be learning? What should I know? So that I can better help teach my kids, and making sure that you are solid in your own faith so that you can answer the questions that your kids have, that you can be open to those questions and let your kids know it's okay to ask them. So I hope this was helpful. I know I threw a lot of kind of resources. I have a lot of links in the description. I have a few links in the description of just some things to take a look at if you're thinking through this issue for yourself and your family. But thank you guys for tuning in and being part of this and watching this. Please, again, comment with any specific questions that you have about specific situations, like, oh, my kid's 10 years old, what resources should I use if I'm homeschooling, that sort of thing. But again, get the book, The Failure of Sex Education in the Church. It's worth getting. It's just valuable information. And thank you guys. And I will see you. Well, let's see. Will I see you? Yeah, I'll see you next week. So, because we got Christmas coming up this week, but the 26th I should still be streaming, so I don't see why not. I don't think I have anything going on that day. So, Merry Christmas to everybody. We're almost there. We're almost to Christmas time, and then it'll be New Year's. It'll be 2021 before you know it. I want to believe it'll be better. We'll see. But I'll see you guys next Saturday, same time, same place, on Pro Life, Pro Liberty Live.